we are going to start looking into Target 6, which is all about equations of circles. If you need to take out a piece of paper to write down some notes, go ahead and just pause the video and do that while we are getting things going here. So, first of all, as you can see right here, this is your general form of an equation of a circle. We have the quantity x minus h squared plus the quantity y minus k squared equals r squared. The h and the k, that is going to represent the center of our circle. And if you look over here at our picture, you can see here is the center of the circle. We then also have up here r squared. That is going to represent the radius. Now, what you should notice is that this is just r, as opposed to in the equation where it's r squared. That means when we go to identify the radius of our circle, we will have to do a little bit of simplifying with the r squared so that we just get r. And then over here in our picture, as you can see, here is the r. R is the distance from the center of the circle to a point on the circle. Okay, all of this information, the center and the radius, we can get from this general form by pulling out the h, pulling out the k to represent our center, and then figuring out what the r is based on the r squared. Is we are going to write the equation of the circle given the center and the radius. So hopefully you wrote down the general form of the equation of the circle. If you didn't, go back in the video, write it down so that you can follow along and enter this information to write your new equations. So let's just remember that the center, this is always our h, and this is always our k. And then our radius, remember, is the r value over here. Okay, so we're going to follow that general form and we're just going to substitute our h, our k, and the r into the equation so that we have our equation of our circle. Pretty simple. Here's how we're going to start. So we start with parentheses, then we have x minus h, which is 4, close that quantity, squared, plus, open, y minus k, which is 3, close, quantity squared, equals. Now remember, the last part of this equation is r squared. We just have the radius. The radius is 8. So we need to actually do 8 squared, or 8 times 8, to get 64, which is how our equation is going to finish. There is your general form of the equation given a center of 4, 3 and a radius of 8. I would now recommend you pause the video, try to do the next 2 problems that I gave you, this center of negative 2, 5, radius square root of 3, and then this center negative 4, 0, radius of 7. Then start the video again and check your answer. For the second equation, you should have gotten x minus negative 2, quantity squared, plus parentheses y minus negative 5, quantity squared, equals 3. Now, a couple of things that you should notice here. We have a double negative in front of the 2 and in front of the 5. So what actually happens with a double negative is that they turn positive. Same thing will happen over here in front of the negative 5, is that this will turn positive. Now, some of you may also be asking, how did the radius of square root of 3 turn into just 3? Well, when you square a square root, this is what's happening. You're taking the square root of 3 and you are squaring it. Those operations actually undo each other. So the squaring cancels out the square root, which is how we just have the 3 left over. And then finally, with our last problem down here at the bottom, we have our center of negative 4, 0, so parentheses x minus 4, close parentheses, plus. Now notice how it's just a 0. When you just have a 0, you don't have to add in the plus or a minus because there's nothing that you're plussing or minusing. You really just need to put y squared equals, remember the last part of the equation is r squared. Our radius is r, which is 7. So that means in this case, we just are going to have at the end of our equation r squared, which is 49. Talked about previously in reverse. Before, you were given the center and the radius, and you were told to write the equation. Now, you are given the equation, and we need to write the center and the radius. So, looking at our first equation, we have x minus 2 quantity squared plus y minus 7 quantity squared equals 49. Remember, your center, your h and your k, are going to come from the numbers in the equation, 2, 7. This is your H, this is your K. The R is going to come from your 49. Now remember with the whole double negative and turning things positive, we need to make sure we pay attention to whether these numbers should be positive or negative. In this problem, because the general form of the equation has two negatives, we don't have to worry about having a double negative. Therefore, our center is going to be 2 comma 7, and our radius is going to be 7. Remember, in the general form of the equation, this last part is r squared. So in order to just get r, we have to take the square root of that number, and that is just our radius. The square root of 49 is 7. I would recommend you pause the video, try the last two, and then check your answer by playing the video again. For our second problem, what you should notice here is that we have this plus sign. That means is that there was a double negative here and a double negative turns positive. So our center is going to be -1, +6, and our radius, we are going to take that 16, and remember this is technically r squared. We are going to do the square root of 16 and get 4. Finally, we have a positive sign here, which means we had a double negative. And notice how there is nothing being added or subtracted to our x. So that means we are just going to put a 0 in that place when we figure out our center. So for the center, 0 in the x spot and a -4 in the y spot. Now, we are going to take the square root of 8 and figure out our radius. Now, since we're not graphing this, we don't necessarily have to worry about what the decimal version of the square root of 8 is. So since we're just identifying, we can leave the radius as the square root of 8. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to write the equation of the circle given a graph. We are also going to need to identify what our center is and what our radius is. So looking at our first problem over here, obviously this dot is our center of our circle. So using our graph, we're going to go 1, 2, 3 up on the y, and then notice we're not moving left to right. So our x is going to be 0 and our y is going to be a +3. That is our center. Now remember the distance from the center to the side of the circle, that represents the radius. Now in this case, we're going 1, 2, 3, 4 units. So our r is equal to 4. Now, taking that information, center being 0, 3, and r being 4, we're going to use that general form of the equation, and we're going to substitute that information in. So here we go. We are going to have x squared. Remember, since we have just 0 over here, there's nothing that needs to be added or subtracted. Plus y minus 3 quantity squared equals, now when you enter this, remember the general form of the equation is r squared. The radius is 4. 4 squared is 16. My recommendation would be to pause the video, try the next two, and then you can check your answer. Next problem, here's our center. Our center is 7, comma, -2. Here's the 7, and then here's the -2. Next is our radius. Remember, radius goes from the center to the circle. This is a radius of -2. To write our equation, we're going to have parentheses, x minus 7 quantity squared plus parentheses, y minus -2 quantity squared equals, so our radius is -2. We're going to do -2 squared, which is -2 times -2, or 4. One thing we do want to come back and realize, we have a double negative here. Double negative turns positive. Finally, here's our center. Notice that our center is at 0, 0. It is at the origin of our circle. For our radius, we go out to the side, and that is going to be a radius of 2. For our equation, because our circle is at the origin, we can just do x squared plus y squared. There's nothing that needs to be added or subtracted. But remember, for the r, which is 2, in the equation, it's r squared. 2 times 2 is 4. These equations of the circles. Now, easiest way to graph this is to first identify what the center and the radius is, and then plot your center and count your radius. So, starting with our center, remember our center comes from the h and the k in our equation. This is our h, this is our k. And then our radius is obviously that last number. Don't forget, in the equation it's r squared, we need r. Now, we do not have a plus sign here or here, so we don't have to worry about the whole double negative where we would take out a negative number. So our center is going to be 3, 5. And because this is r squared, our radius is going to be the square root of 9, which is 3. Next step is to come to our graph. Since our center is 3, 5, we're going to start by plotting 3, 5. So move over 1, 2, 3, up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's our center, put a point. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to count our radius. Remember, the radius is the distance from the center to the circle. And because we can't count on a diagonal, we're going to keep our counting straight, up, down, left, and right. So from the center, we're going to count up 1, 2, 3, put a point. Down 1, 2, 3, put a point. Left 1, 2, 3, put a point. Right 1, 2, 3, put a point. Now, those 4 points are going to kind of be our guideline to drawing the rest of our circle. So, starting at the top, we're going to do the best that we can to hit all 4 of those points all the way around. My circles are not going to be perfect. I don't expect your circles to be perfect, but they should be pretty darn close. Okay, so there we are graphing our equation of our circle. Now, my recommendation would be pause the video, try this problem, and then start the video again to see if you are correct. For this problem now, notice we have a plus sign here. So that means we had a double negative. So when we take the number out, it should be a -2. We don't have a plus sign here, so we're just going to pull out a 4. And then remember, for the radius, we need to take this last number, do our square root, and get 4. Now, going to our graph, step 1 is going to be to plot our center, so -2, up 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we're going to count 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, put another point, 1, 2, 3, 4, point, down 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Now use those points as your guide to drawing your circle. And there we go. One more to graph. Here we are. Center is going to be 3. Now notice nothing is being plus or minused here, which means we fill it in with a 0. Take the square root of your 25, and we get that the radius is equal to 5. Step 1 for graphing, plot your center. So our center is 3, 0, which means we're going to be right on that x-axis because we're not moving up or down anywhere. From there, we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, put a point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, put a point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, point. Last but not least, do the best you can. Draw that circle, try to connect all of those points all the way around, and there you go.